Okay, I have just finished a trilogy. It is the Infernal Devices trilogy by Cassandra Clare. It is the prequel to the... I can't remember how many there are in Mortal Instruments. Is it 9? I've read them all, but a long time ago. So Clockwork Angel was given to me. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I've reviewed it separately. I'm going to put a link to that review down below. It introduces Tessa Gray, who's come from America to London at the behest of her brother, who went ahead of her some time. It starts in 1878, which makes it quite fascinating because the Mortal Instruments is so very here and now, modern day America. It's pretty sure it's set in New York, America anyway. And here we are, back in the 1800s of London. And the historical element is beautifully done. You don't read Mortal Instruments and assume that this is an author who's going to glory in rediscovering the 1800s London, but she has, and she's done a great job. She's got a good job of the cadence of the characters, the conversation, the general demeanour of people from that era, in my opinion. And she's clearly done huge amounts of research to make London feel real. So I loved that about the first one. Throughout the entire trilogy, she starts off chapters with poetry that is almost all of it period accurate poetry. It's the poetry that the people in that book, those characters, would have known. And two of her characters, Tessa Gray, with whom we start, and Will Herondale, the shadow hunter who rescues her from confinement, both of them are heavily into literature, so we get constant references to period literature. It's a bit Dickens heavy. Like Tessa, A Tale of Two Cities is my favourite Dickens, but there's other Dickens and there is other literature as well. So yes, finished the first one, loved it, ordered in the next two. I did not review number 2, The Clockwork Prince, separately. It is very clearly a number 2 in a trilogy. And while as a book it is far better than many number 2s in a trilogy often are, it's an excellent read. It's got story arcs. It's got all the good things, but there seemed to be to me to be no real point in reviewing it separately because you're not going to read it separately. It wouldn't work without number 1 first, and it wouldn't really work without number 3 afterwards either, to be honest. But yeah, in number 2, the promised love triangle that was very foreshadowed in this one comes about, and yes, Jem and Will both love Tessa. In number 2, we have the development of that love, though, and I think it did really well. So, love triangles in young adult books can be a little bit basic, but in this one, it isn't really. You get a slow development. So Tessa and Will meet each other and there's instant attraction. There's a lot of mutual interest in literature. They have good dialogue and they bounce off each other well. Will, however, is an asshole to her. He's nasty to most people. That includes her. He'll slip into being nice for a while and then he'll turn around. Jem, on the other hand, is routinely courteous, pleasant, and him and Tess develop a relationship. So, rather than just falling in love because you happen to be there and you're single, they actually develop a relationship. And so when he finally asks her to marry him, it makes sense. And her accepting him, even though it's a surprise to her, also makes sense. All of that makes linear sense, and your characters are doing sensible things. Now, throughout the second one, we develop the notion of why Will is an unpleasant character to most people. He has a curse on him that he got when he was young. And by the way, this whole review is probably going to be spoilers. If you're worried about spoilers, just don't go away. So when Will was young, him and his 2 sisters were living with his parents in Wales. And I loved the Welsh connection, by the way. Loved it. His father was an ex-shadow hunter, but his mother wasn't. And his father had completely broken with the whole shadow hunter world in order to marry Will's mother. But he kept some things from his shadow hunter career, and one of them was this box whose name I've forgotten. Sounds like Pyrex, but rather than being a glass-like element that can be put in the oven, it's a demon catcher. Will found this not Pyrex box and accidentally released a demon. When he was doing this, his older sister came into the room. The demon told Will that he was cursed, that everyone, as a thank you for having saved him, he was now cursed for all eternity, that anyone he loved would die horribly, and the first would be his sister. So when his older sister dies in agony a day or two later, Will takes this as a confirmation of the curse, and at the age of 13 or 14 or thereabouts, takes himself off to the London Institute and tells them he wants to be a shadow hunter. He doesn't really at that stage, he just wants to save his family from dying horribly because he loves them. So for the next however many years, with very few exceptions, Will behaves as if he's nice to anyone, they're going to be cursed by this demon. The exception to that is Jem, who comes from the Shanghai Institute, and they become Parabati, which is a kind of shadow hunter blood brotherhood where you inscribe a rune on each other's chest and you one for all for one type of thing. The two of them are friends. Will isn't really nice to anyone else. So because he's fallen in love with Tess, he's insistent that he's going to catch this demon and break the curse. And I'm not going to go into too much details about how that happened, but it happens through the facility of Magnus Bane, a character I adored both in the Mortal Instruments and in the Bane Chronicles. Still adore him. If Magnus Bane is in something, I'm there to read it. At the end, Will divests himself from his curse. Read it to find out how, and he goes dashing back to the London Institute to tell Tessa it's all okay now. I don't have to be nasty to people who love me. I love you, we can be together. And Tess has to say, me and Jem have become secretly engaged. We were going to announce it soon. This gives Tessa a really good story arc because, yes, she does love both of them. She was certainly very attracted to Will, but she backed off from him, and Jem has been nice to her. So she's conflicted about her feelings, but she's never conflicted about her course of action, and you've got to respect that. She's bound herself to Jem. She does like him. She's going to go ahead with that. Poor Will, right? Still, he behaves as if he's cursed a lot of the time. And then, having finished number 2 and enjoying it thoroughly, I put it down and went straight on to Clockwork Princess number 3. I'm not sure that was the greatest idea. I hadn't read anything else in between. I was pretty much so wild for them, I was reading them one after the other, like opening a Pringles pack and eating until there's nothing left in there. I call this channel the Omnivorous Reader because I need to read omnivorously. I need to read lots of different things, and I think I was giving myself Cassandra Clare overload, which is entirely unfair on Cassandra Clare, who's produced a magnificent series of books. In this trilogy, you have multiple story arcs. Something I object to in many other books is that you have a trilogy and one story arc. So you finish one novel and you get no sense of having achieved something. Cassandra Clare has multiple story arcs, so many. Per book you've got several that end. Each book ends with a story arc, so you feel you've moved somewhere. And then there's the overall story arc, which is Mortman, who's the true bad guy for whom Tessa was first captured in number 1 and forced to learn to shapeshift when she'd always thought she was human. We start number 3 with everyone knows that Tessa isn't entirely human. She certainly isn't a shadow hunter, but exactly what she is, no one's quite sure. She might be... They're pretty sure she's a downworlder, like Magnus Bane and many others, and there's fairies and demons and a whole heap of things, but no one is quite sure. But they've accepted her into the Institute. Jem has proposed marriage. She belongs. The first thing that happens in number 3 is finishing off a story arc from number 2. So throughout number 2, Charlotte Branwell, who's head of the London Institute, is being challenged by a whole diverse range of people, but largely by Benedict Lightwood. I keep wanting to say lightsaber. It's not lightsaber. It's Lightwood. Lightwood. He is the bad guy. He's a stooge of the uber villain Mortman, but he's the enactor. So he's the day-to-day pressure, if you will, the actual bad guy who does bad things along the way. The first thing that happens in number 3 is that his younger son, Gabriel, who's always been very much team my dad, comes running to the Institute to find his older brother, Gideon, who's already living in the Institute, and say, oh my God, Dad's turned into a demon, which we kind of knew was happening because he was consorting with demons and we knew he had this, I kid you not, sexually transmitted disease that shadow hunters can get from demons, and they get a demon STD and they eventually turn into a demon. I don't know how she thought this up. I mean, it's marvellous, but yes, a demon STD. So this has happened to Benedict Lightwood, who's already been defeated as a villain by the end of the second book, but now he's turned into essentially, I guess, a kind of demon nematode. And off the entire institute runs to save him from Shadow World from him. It's never not going to be funny, is it? So we do that first, and then he's defeated, and now we've got both the Lightwood boys living in the institute. Next thing that happens is that Will's younger sister, not the one that was killed by the demon, but the other one, Ceci, turns up at the institute. Her plan is to save her brother from the evil shadow hunters that are holding him captive and bring him back to Wales to Mum and Dad. Which doesn't work because Will may not have a curse on him anymore, but he can still be pretty nasty and he's not going anywhere. He's become a shadow hunter. That is his identity. And Ceci is left sort of hanging in there. By page 170, I still hadn't seen what the Cecily subplot was there for. It wasn't really doing it for me. It seemed pointless. She seemed pretty pointless. But I loved the Welsh. Now here's a point which I'm going to divert to. In other books I've frequently said how annoying I find it when the author keeps inserting huge amounts of tracts in other languages. If you read historic literature, they do it all the time in German, Italian, French, whatever. It's annoying. But yeah, that's what they did back in the day, right? In modern texts, a couple of my reviews I've complained about it. I don't speak Spanish just because someone in America does speak Spanish. I guess it's prevalent over there. I don't, and it shouldn't be in this book. So now, this thing that I've complained about in other books, I've got to say Cassandra Clare does it well. There's a lot of Welsh because Will and Cecily are both Welsh and they speak it frequently. And there's Latin, because Shadowhunters speak even more Latin than all the normal people from the 1800s used to. It's part of their world mythology, whatever. And rather than objecting, I loved it thoroughly. For a start, Cassandra Cass does it properly. She will trot out this statement in whatever, and then she'll find a way to tell you what it means. So you're not hanging out there going, what? Was I meant to understand that? Was I meant to Google it? What are you doing to me here? She does it well. It doesn't hurt that her two main languages are Welsh and Latin. There's a little bit of Mandarin as well from Jem, but not too much, and always explained. And Welsh and Latin are the only two other languages other than English I've ever wanted to speak, and I've tried a few times. So I was thrilled. And if we had a whole sentence from Cecily to Will in Welsh, and I managed to understand more than two words, it made my day. Lots to enjoy about that. What else? So we're in number 3. I've moved on to it rather fast, and I think that became a problem. So around about page 206, I think it was, I realised that we hadn't really seen much at all of the Uber plot. That's Mortman, who's creating these clockwork infernal devices and who still wants to kidnap Tessa for reasons no one's clear on, because no one's quite clear on what Tessa is. Every now and then, those first 200 pages, someone will pop up every now and then and go, we mustn't forget Mortman's out there waiting for us. And they go, no, we won't forget Mortman. And then they get back into the main plot. And the main plot here is basically young adult romance. We've got the trilogy that is Will, Tessa and Jem, and that's going along fine. We've got Cecily, who seems to be falling in love with the young lightsaber. Sorry. Gabriel Lightwood, who's in the Institute. We've got Charlotte Branwell and her husband Henry. They've got their own rocky road to travel. We've got the older Lightwood boy Gideon, who's making puppy dog eyes after the servant girl Sophie. And it's rocking along nicely. None of the relationships are annoying. They're all working well. Not a problem. So I'm actually enjoying it, but we have forgotten about the main plot. And then it kind of all fell down for me. The main plot is restored. Tessa gets kidnapped by the evil Dark Sister who had already previously been dead, but now she's here again, and then Tessa escapes. Then Tessa's recaptured, and then she escapes, or she does something, and I was really, really underwhelmed. I was bored. And then Will figures out where Tessa's been taken. It was really tough because someone kept telling them exactly where she was, but they kept ignoring her. Finally, he figures it out. He steals an Institute horse, goes racing off into the darkness all on his own to rescue her, because that's going to work so well. And then we've got Will galloping his horse into the mud for pages and pages, and it's repetitive. And it was unenjoyable, and I'd put the book down and I wouldn't want to pick it up. And when I did pick it up, I'd start skim reading. I was not enjoying it. I thought it was silly. Throughout the entire book, there's this subplot where the consul who's in charge of the Shadow Hunters is trying to undermine Charlotte Branwell, which is a repetitive plot because in the previous book it was Gabriel Lightwood's father Benedict who, through the demon pox, was trying to undermine Charlotte, but this time it's Council Wayland who was responsible for putting her there in the first place. Whatever. And I really am not sure to this day if the reason that I wasn't enjoying it was because I was overloaded on this one particular genre and this one particular series and this one particular author. But none of it made sense. Tessa was a sensible character. She'd been in captivity before. She hadn't behaved like a moron. Here, she behaves like a moron. Tessa never struck me as a screamer. All of a sudden, she starts screaming all over the place. Will is quirky at the best of the time, but his behaviour makes no sense. And we get a fair bit of all of this. Tessa knows that Mortman is the bad guy. When she's taken captive, finally, it's like a 5-minute Stockholm syndrome. He tells her he had a bad childhood and all of a sudden she's cooperating with him, even though she knows that she's the thing that he wants in order to make his army work, and she cooperates with him? Nothing in any of those previous books suggests that Tessa is suffering from a fatal brain defect. It's a ridiculous thing for her to do. And I've got no idea why Cassandra Clare did it. I can only assume that this plot would not move forward without her doing that, but I'm sure she could have found a better way. It wasn't great. It wasn't even good. Yeah, anyway. Whatever. I got through that finally. And the last part of the book, Will breaks into the castle through a underwater tunnel, maybe? I don't know. And he finds Tessa, but he becomes entrapped in the same trap she's in. And by now, he knows that Jem's dead because his Parabati rune is dissolved and they console each other. Story arc fulfilled. Meanwhile, Henry's been working back on the Institute's been working on the portal. The guy who's undermining Charlotte Branwell has told her that she can't go after Tessa and that no one believes her, and if she tries she's going to lose her position. Of course she does it anyway. Henry's portal has been completed by Magnus Bane, who is totally my hero in these series, by the way. Team Magnus Bane to the max. And Charlotte, the London Institute Shadow Hunters, and just one or two silent brothers who accompany them all head off into Mortman's castle to rescue Tessa and defeat the hundreds of automatons that they know he has. I feel there should be music in the background here, but it's probably drums, not violins. Anyway, maybe not the wisest decision, but you know, they're so used to making unwise decisions and it working out, they probably didn't think that one through. So, after Will and Tess have consummated their so far unrequited love, the first person to burst in on them is Magnus Bane, who gets them out of the cell, and they all go down to the main hall where they're fighting automatons. These automatons, through Tessa's assistance, have now been imbued with demons and can't be killed by the shadow hunters the way they used to. Go Tessa, because that was such a good decision making you made there. So they're fighting away. Various things happen. Oh, and now I have to mention the wonderful maid. This book has a lot of side characters and most of them are good. One of my favourites is the gloomy singing maid. Can't even remember what her name is. She has virtually no character. She sits in the kitchen doing her work, singing all these songs of doom, gloom, death, dismemberment, horror, and broken hearts. I think every single one of those songs is genuine to the period. The ones I checked were, the ones I recognised definitely were. So she's awesome in that. Plus she supplies a much needed break in hot and heavy scenes. People are getting really, really heat up, and all of a sudden, and sweet William found his grave, wafts up from the kitchen and everyone breaks. It's a good plot tactic, and I do quite like it. But this maid has come to the Institute because, even though she isn't a shadow hunter, she's been trained by shadow hunters. And she is like a killing machine. She is like Edward Scissorhands of killing machines with 100 flying blades that rips everything to pieces. Wonderful character. Adored her. Anyway, here we are, fighting for our lives. And from around the point when Will found Tessa, the writing started to hang together for me, and I was hanging on every word. It was great. It was tight. It was vivid. The writing had redeemed itself, and I was enjoying myself thoroughly. The end and how they get out of that situation is gold. And I'm not going to tell you what it is. I think that people should, if you've been watching 20 minutes worth of me gabbling on about the series, you either have watched it or read this book, or you really should. It is really spectacular. That end redeems itself. From the point when Will and Tess get together, this book is absolutely marvellous. The ending, the dynamics, the things that happen to the characters, many of them not so great. And then we have the epilogue. The ending blew me away. I was so happy. I enjoyed it thoroughly. And then after the ending, we have an epilogue which is in 2008. And oh my stars, I didn't think it could get any better. All my complaints about Cassandra Clare and the soggy centre of the book dissipated like alcohol on a hot day. It is marvellous. That epilogue blew my mind. Absolutely loved it. Now, throughout that last book, there are things that I feel foreshadow the Mortal Instruments. There are things that I feel that if my memory was better, I'd recognise. For a start, a lot of that Ceci and the Lightwoods and Gideon and Charlotte's baby, all of those things I feel are there to give us the cast of characters that are in the Mortal Instruments, but I don't remember them that well. Got an idea that Tessa Gray, who is immortal, appears there. I know Magnus Bane does, because that's when I fell in love with him, but I feel like Tessa Gray is also there. But many of these descendants are. There are Lightwoods in that book. I'm not sure about Branwell's. I'm not sure about... But yeah. A lot of it felt like it was setting itself up for the Mortal Instruments and filling in the backstories of characters that people loved from that one. I wish I could remember it well enough. Having finished Clockwork Princess, my strongest urge was to run over to that bookshelf over there where Mortal Instruments is sitting, grab the first one and start reading them voraciously until I tied up all the characters from this trilogy with that series. I can't. I don't have time. There's too many of them. But the urge is there. I want to see how the characters in this really super excellent trilogy continue on to Mortal Instruments. I wish I could remember, and it certainly spurred me on to reread Mortal Instruments, which will probably take me the best part of half a year. So not imminent, shall we say. Yeah. I've rarely had a book that annoyed me in the centre of it redeem itself so well. Love this trilogy, do recommend.